A cool breeze crept through the valley outside of Telluride, Colorado, as my friends and I unloaded the truck parked on the dirt driveway. We had recently started renting an old mining house built in the early 1900s. Most of the home had been renovated over the years, but there were still glimpses of what the house used to be. The exterior of the home was painted a bright yellow and adorned a blood-red door. The yard was abundant, with lush green grass, minus the few brown patches that littered the ground. In the corner of the yard sat a dilapidated gazebo filled to the brim with landscaping equipment. I stood facing the house, admiring the quaint ambiance it seemed to exude. I felt something hit my back and spun around. My brother, William, was standing behind me with a box under his right arm. "Let's pick up the pace, we don't have all day," he said, with a little annoyance masked in his voice. Yeah, I responded, and started walking to the back of the truck. My other two friends, Elijah and Leon, were in the process of stacking some boxes on a dolly. "Hey man, take this to my room," Elijah said as he handed me a large box. I resituated it in my arms and gripped it. As I did so, I could hear glass clanging inside and a strong, familiar odor starting to leak out. "Hey man, be careful," Elijah snapped. "If you ever want to smoke again, I'd highly advise you to take it one step at a time there, champ." "Maybe if you didn't throw everything into one single box without bubble wrap, then you wouldn't have an issue of something breaking, Elijah," Leon responded. Elijah's eyes widened, as if he had just figured out the secrets of the universe. I laughed, turned around, and proceeded into the house. The floorboards creaked as I stepped onto the warped living room floor. I surveyed my surroundings of the old rustic home as I headed to Elijah's bedroom. Only 2 interior rooms had been renovated in the entire house, one being the kitchen, which had marble countertops and new appliances, the other being my room. I was the one who found the home on the market, so respectively I had first choice of which room I wanted to claim as my own. The other rooms, on the other hand, were still the same as they had been since the early 1900s, with dreary wooden floorboards and old chipping paint. "Dude, what the hell?" William yelled from upstairs. I quickly climbed the narrow stairway to find my brother in his room. I walked in to find what looked like to be a large lump underneath the wooden floorboards. It almost looked like Andre the Giant was buried in the middle of the room. "I told you it was an old home, Will. Things shift over time," I said, trying to hold my snickering back. "Yeah, I get that, but you didn't say that I'd have to maneuver around a speed bump," he snapped back. I took a deep sigh and turned to him. "Okay, look man, we're only going to be here for a year. You've got plenty of room to put your bed so you're not sleeping on an incline." William turned back to the floor dejected. "That's easy for you to say. You're not staying on the cover of Sticky Fingers by the Rolling Stones." After we had moved everything into the house, we all plopped down on the couch, beers in hand, and began our well-deserved R&R. Elijah had already begun smoking, and the room started to fill with the pungent odor. "So are we going to be doing some ghost hunting tonight, boys?" Elijah said as he passed the joint to Leon. "Oh, come on, you don't actually believe that crap, do you?" Leon responded as he was rolling his eyes. "The guy blew his brains out on the front porch in the 1930s. I'd be surprised if there wasn't a ghost floating through the halls. I mean, how do you think we got such a killer deal on rent?" William said as he lifted his arms and started mimicking the sounds of a specter. "Shut up. It's all nonsense. You've just been watching too much Ghost Hunters," I responded. "But anyway, I'm gonna go to bed. We need to get up early to do some cleaning. Good night, guys." I stood up and meandered to my room. In all reality, I was a little perturbed by what happened at this house. I've always been quite agnostic to my beliefs of ghosts or spirits, but I've never witnessed anything myself. The rent was super cheap for an entire house, and I wanted to save some money for a trip outside of the country. I pushed the fact that someone had ended their life to the back of my mind. I wish things would have turned out much differently. I entered my room and slid under my sheets and basked in the warmth of my bed. It had been a long day and my body ached from moving. I grabbed my phone and looked for a rain and thunder YouTube video to help me sleep, and after about 15 minutes, I crept into comfortable darkness. My eyes shot open in the middle of the night. The moonlight shone through my window and enveloped my room in comforting light. I could hear creaking from the house as the wind howled outside. I tried to sit up, but found my efforts futile. Sleep paralysis was a regular occurrence in my life. It happened at least once a month due to stress and a little help from my antidepressants. At this point, I'd almost gotten used to it. I could hear what sounded like a light scratching noise coming from inside my room, and prepared myself for the usual dark figure to be standing in the corner. My eyes darted from left to right, trying to decipher where the noise was coming from. It was then I started to hear skittering, like someone or something was moving around. A cold feeling crept over my body as I started sweating profusely, my sheets becoming soaked. The skittering stopped, but was replaced by cracking, one that resembled that of broken bone. Out of my peripheral vision, I could see long, needle-like limbs protruding from my closet. They each moved slowly, tapping the wall as if they were looking for something. I then saw a large, bulbous black mass starting to show itself from the closet door. It was coated in tiny hairs and twitched almost habitually. A loud moan echoed throughout my room as the creature finally presented itself. A spider-like entity was situated on my wall. The reason I say spider-like was because its head had been replaced with that of a human one. Its eyes were blacked out from the shadows of moonlight, and its lower jaw was removed, revealing a blotchy tongue that oozed saliva. It was about the size of a twin bed and stared at me for what seemed like hours. My heart was racing. I was begging my body to move, but to no avail. I was stuck there, in suspended torment. I tried screaming, but I was unable to make a sound. All I could do was watch the creature on my wall as it grew closer. Suddenly, it skittered to the ceiling right above me and started scratching with its two front legs, almost like it was burrowing. It then started to sink into the wall, as if the wall had turned into quicksand. First, the abdomen, then the legs. Eventually, all that was left was its mangled head staring straight at me. Those cold, dead eyes boring into my soul. I could hear it moaning, and I could feel the drips of saliva hit my torso. The creature then let out an inhuman roar and vanished into my ceiling. My body was finally released, and I jolted out of my bed screaming. As I did, the house erupted into more terrified outcries coming from upstairs. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who saw something, and, unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last time either.
We live on several acres in rural Indiana, USA. Our neighbors aren't too far apart, but we all live on a lot of property. On our properties, we have a lot of trees, and our neighbor doesn't maintain their property well, so a lot of it's overgrown. You know, a couple of fallen trees and a lot of downed branches. We knew the state of their property was probably because it was an older couple that owned the house and the property was vast. We have a creek separating our homes as well, but a small strip of their property is accessible from our backyard. Due to the overgrowth in trees, we weren't able to see much of their property when we first moved in the summer, and of course we didn't go onto their land because we didn't want to trespass. One night, my daughter and her friend were camping in the backyard and ran inside, swearing that they heard a kid laughing or crying in our backyard. I figured it was their imagination from too many scary stories while in the tent, but went out to investigate briefly just in case. I heard a faint noise coming from just beyond our property line. I moved the flashlight into the general direction and called out to whoever may be in the trees. The sound stopped. I decided it was probably just a couple of stray cats, but just in case, I had the girls set up the tent in the living room. The next day, after taking my daughter's friend home, curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to investigate the area by our property line. As I neared the line of trees, I saw a small path I had never noticed before. Since I knew my neighbors were too far and the trees were too thick, they couldn't see me on their property, so I stepped onto the small path. I walked slowly, looking down, watching for poison ivy and fallen branches. I wasn't too far in when I saw a dirty, broken kid's toy on the ground, wrapped in overgrown weeds. I looked up, and in the distance I saw a small, white shed-like structure. As I got closer, there were more and more toys scattered on the ground, some partially buried, all broken and dirty. Then there was barbed wire, and I could see the front of the shed and realized it was a large playhouse with a wooden alphabet decorating the outside. I was starting to feel uneasy. This playhouse was at least half a mile or more from the only house on the property. I stopped in my tracks, letting my imagination go a little, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I must have jumped a foot off the ground, only to turn around and see that my daughter had followed me. Once my heart slowed down, I decided to get a closer look. There was more broken barbed wire fencing on the ground the closer we got. The window on the side was broken, and there was a hole in the roof. There was a broken train set, one a kid would be able to ride on. The front door had a white piece of wood set to lock someone in, not keep people out. At this point, my daughter was in full panic mode and begging for us to walk back to our house, but I had to at least look through the window, or my mind would wander with all the possibilities of what could be in there. As I was stepping to the side of the shed, my daughter was following close behind. In her fear, she was paying more attention to me than where she was stepping, and she cut her leg pretty deep on some barbed wire that was hidden in overgrowth. I quickly glanced inside the window, only to see a partially dirt floor and broken wood, and a large wooden bench with a dark stain on top. I picked up my daughter, who was determined her leg was going to fall off. We left the neighbor's property, and I took her to the doctor to get a tetanus shot and get her cleaned up. That night after dinner, I let the dog out, but couldn't get her to come back in. I let her stay outside for a while and checked again a little later. Our dog still wouldn't come in, and I noticed she was standing by the path we took earlier. I grabbed a flashlight and her leash and headed out to her. She was pacing, whining, and sniffing around everywhere. I figured it was from the blood earlier, but she never ventured onto the path. Then, I heard the giggling of a little girl. I called out to the child, but there was no answer in return, just some rustling in the leaves. I ran inside with the dog to check on my daughter to make sure that she was still in the house. She was laying in bed, fast asleep. The next morning, I went straight to the playhouse, but as I was approaching, something was wrong. The broken toys seemed to be in different places, and when I got to the playhouse, my heart felt like it was a ton of bricks. All over the side of the playhouse were children's drawings, in my daughter's blood. It was a summer ago. My family and I had gone to a cabin that most would use for a winter vacation, but my family wasn't like that. The cabin was located in the middle of the forest. There was no cell phone service, so, as you can imagine, I was pissed. My mom always complained to me about being isolated and confined to the comforts of my phone. I always found solace in my phone, since being around people made me feel irrational and just plain weird. My parents never understood that. Anyway, my little sister is 6 years old and was playing around in the forest. She had gone a bit too far out of my sight, and I started to get a little worried. I called out her name but got no response. I then went in the direction that she did and found nothing but a bloodied bow. My eyes widened as I frantically ran around looking for her. I found a blood trail that led into the deeper parts of the forest. I hesitated, but nothing was going to stop me from saving my sister. I followed the trail for as far as it went. After about an hour, the blood stopped at a hole. I debated whether I should go back and tell my parents, but I didn't think they'd believe me, even if I did say that my sister was missing. There's no denying my parents thought I was insane. Despite my fear, I jumped into the hole. I fell for what felt like forever. Then, I finally hit water. My face morphed into disgust as I stumbled through what I thought was a sewer, since there was no light. I looked up out of the hole and saw a tiny white dot. I started to walk around. It was crunching under my feet. I paid no attention to it since I thought it was some dead leaves or sticks that had fallen into the sewer. That was until I fell. Some unknown liquid had splashed all over me. I remembered that my phone was in my back pocket, and I pulled it out and shined it on myself. Time seemed to slow down as I realized what I was walking in. It was a river of fresh blood. The blood had absolutely soaked me. I held in a scream as to not alert any nearby creatures. I then ran through the connection of tunnels and refused to stop until I started hearing footsteps behind me. I stopped, turned around, and shined my flashlight around. The light from my phone landed on a distant figure. It looked so small, so maybe it was a dog or an alligator that had sneaked in. I stupidly started to move towards it, and as I got closer, the figure started to get clearer. I started to see that it wasn't a dog or an alligator. As soon as I realized this, I stopped in my tracks and stared. It looked like me. Its body was contorted. Their back faced towards the ground, and its head was turned right side up and faced towards me. Its legs were normal, but its arms were legs as well. It had jagged teeth, and it was chewing on what was left of my sister's head. Then, I saw my parents' head beside it. I stepped back in shock and fear. The mutant of myself charged towards me. In a state of panic, I tried to run away, but I slipped. I hit my head on the rock and passed out. My parents were traveling for the weekend, as it was their anniversary, and to no surprise, they wanted to be alone. This meant that I had to take care and be in charge of my little brother, Oliver. Our home and neighborhood were surrounded by woods, and Ollie liked ambling around the trail that was behind our house, but he couldn't go back there without permission. So naturally, since I was 18 and he was 10, I'd have to go with him for precautionary purposes. It was a little while before lunch, so I decided to join Ollie in his trek, so that way my appetite would be in a more salubrious state. It was spring, and the leaves were meager and just starting to grow back onto the trees, which also meant I had to watch out for any sort of dangerous animals that could possibly lurk out and cause harm to any of us. I could hear Ollie sniffing the air, and then him groaning at something.
Something smells like shit.
he said nasally as he pinched his nostrils shut. Hey, watch your mouth, I retorted, surprised by the sudden curse. Just because Mom and Dad aren't here doesn't mean you're allowed to say whatever. I did, however, sniff the air. He was right. There was a smell of rotten meat that permeated my nose. It was like roadkill. I saw what looked like legs by a tree about several yards from us. Stay right there, okay? I instructed Ollie. He nodded in agreement while keeping his hand on his nose. I leisurely walked forward and turned the tree to see what the thing was. It was a deer, and it was dead all right. Flies droned and swarmed around it. I was used to seeing dead animals around here. Hunting was pretty frequent. But there was something that rather took me aback. It was the fact that the way its neck had been ravaged into. It was almost entirely gone and torn down to the bone. A bear would go down to the muscle and stop there. But to the bone? This had to have been from something much more vicious. But what? I looked back to see if Ollie had actually done what I urged him to. He did, but he was peering out to the woods. His eyes, so fixated, were filled with concern and his face unnerved. You okay, bud? I asked, noticing his expression. Something's out there, he murmured as he continued to seem alarmed. I looked to see if he was kidding around. All that was in my view were the trees and brush. It might have been a deer or something. Don't worry so much. Come on, let's go back and get some lunch. And so we did, just to reassure him. I made ourselves some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as we watched a movie for a bit. Ollie usually liked his sandwiches, and he'd been done with it in a few minutes, but he ate his so sluggishly. I didn't bother asking what he saw, because I figured that he must have scared himself and that he'd get over it in a while. However, the back of my mind was still unsettled by that deer. How could its neck have been mutilated like that to such a grisly state? Night dawned upon both of us, and Ollie was begging me to let him sleep beside me as I put him to bed. What's gotten into you? I asked him. That thing's still out there. It was staring at me. It was dark and big. Bigger than you. I'm sure you just scared yourself. If anything was out there, it wasn't anything dangerous. He continued to beg me, but I kept refusing, and told him to close his eyes and that he'd forget about it in the morning. I laid down in my bed, ready for a good rest. I like keeping my TV on just so I have a source of light in my room. I felt my eyes starting to sag and get heavy as I slowly felt myself growing drowsy. There was a sudden snap from outside. It sounded like a stick being splintered. I figured it was some animal, like another deer, but what would be out at this time of night? My TV was still on, so I decided to watch a little bit more just so I could go back to sleep. Without even thinking, my gaze floated to the window, and my heart punched the inside of my chest. There was something at the window. I couldn't see what it was, save for the eyes. They were milky and opaque, almost lifeless, but they were staring right through me. I tried to make it seem like I didn't see the figure outside, and just roll over onto my stomach and pretend to be asleep to try and avert it. I then heard something against the glass. The thing was scratching my window. The sound was piercing my ears and grated at my nerves. My chest started to feel full as my breath started to shorten. My window was starting to open, and I could hear that thing climbing into my room. Its presence was clearly made, as its shadow covered my entire bed in black. I sat there hyperventilating for what seemed like hours, until I felt the mattress start to sink in. The springs groaned as the thing had climbed onto the bed. I felt I could literally die from fright right there. The thing started to move across my bed. I was trying my best not to breathe so hard, but I was completely terror-stricken. It then stopped and stood right at my shoulders. I felt its giant feet clasping onto my shoulder blades. I could hardly breathe. I had a mirror to my right that allowed me to see what was above me, and chills ran down my spine. The creature was black, large and at least 7 feet tall and lanky. Its arms went down to its calves. Its chest leaned over me and stretched to an impossible degree. It didn't even look human or animal. It seemed alien. I shut my eyes tight, hoping that it was just some dream. I could start to hear the creature's heavy breaths and growling. It sounded like a dog, but much more disturbing. As it grasped harder, I feared the worst. My ears were ringing. I wasn't breathing while I bit my tongue. My eyes were shut so tight, and the blood flow in my head stopped almost completely. Something then beckoned it off of me, and the creature leapt off. Through my ringing ears, I thought I could hear something like thumps and rusty hinges. I painfully felt the blood flow starting to come back, and I blacked out. Morning came and I had a massive headache now, and my chest felt so tight. I needed to go wake up Ollie and make breakfast, and I reluctantly did so. I went into his room but found his bed empty. I checked all of downstairs to check if he was there somewhere. Nothing. I then thought of the one place he could definitely be if he was hiding. I went outside and took to the path in the back of the woods. I walked some ways while trying to get over the pain in my head when I saw his bare feet by the tree. "Ollie," I said, exhausted and annoyed in my grimace. "Come on, what are you—" I stopped. I felt my whole entire world collapse as I was bludgeoned with every single negative emotion possible. I put 2 and 2 together, and it answered my questions as it brought my distress up tenfold. Ollie was sitting there. His skin was pale. His cloudy eyes trickled with blood, and his neck was mangled to the bone. He was dead. He wasn't lying. That creature was still out there. One night last summer, 2 of my friends, Sam and Jake, convinced me to sneak out with them and drink. We were all bored, just looking for something to do. We decided to go for a walk to a local gas station that was open 24 hours a day. The walk there was pretty uneventful. We talked about random topics and drank a couple of beers. Once we got to the gas station, Jake had to use the bathroom. When he was in the bathroom, there was a dirty, sketchy guy in there. Jake struck up a conversation with this guy. It was pretty normal, except when the guy asked why he was out so late and if he was by himself. Jake brushed it off as the guy was just trying to tell him to stay safe. We bought some snacks and we noticed the guy following us around while he was talking to someone on his phone. We left soon after, and on the way back, we sat on the side of the road and talked for a while as we drank some more. It was pitch black by now because there are no streetlights in the area. We saw a car coming down the road, which was no big deal. We sneak out pretty often and we've never had any real problems. Cars usually just drive by. This time was different. The car spun around in the road and pulled up right next to us on the street, and 2 guys got out. We ditched the beers, got up, and sprinted down the street. Jake and I hid behind an RV, while Sam hopped a fence. The 2 men looked dirty, like they hadn't showered in days. We watched the 2 guys for a little while, which is when we noticed that one of them had a gun in his hand. They looked in our direction for a few minutes before they got back into their car and drove off. Jake and I looked for Sam, but we couldn't find him, so we decided to head back home. We thought we had lost them, but on the way back we turned a corner and those same guys were sitting in the car, waiting there. We ran through the alleyways and backyards until we lost them. Every few minutes we saw the car driving slowly down a street or alleyway in the distance, and we would hide. Eventually we made it back, and Sam messaged to tell us that he got followed by a different car, but he made it home safe. It's been almost a year since that night.
We're always more cautious when we go out, and Sam still has nightmares about being abducted. I don't know for sure if the guy from the bathroom had anything to do with it, but we believe that he's somehow connected to it.
This happened when I was 17 years old. It's been nearly 2 years since my girlfriend broke up with me, and I was very chewed up about it on the inside. I've called her several times, but it always went to voicemail. I've tried texting her on Messenger since, ironically, we were friends on Facebook, but still, not a single response. As the weeks went by, I became very devastated and was worried that I'd never find love again. My brother told me to just forget about my ex-girlfriend and that it was time for me to move on. He introduced me to this app called Tinder, which he said was great for online dating. I was very familiar with online dating, but never actually done any of it because there was no way that I even felt like hooking up with some random person I met online. But I figured it couldn't hurt to try it out, so I decided to give it a shot. After I finished setting up my account and was done creating my profile, I just started randomly liking a few of the girls that I thought were pretty. I'm not picky, I just wanted to make sure that I found the right girl for me. A few weeks later, I've had already received my first match on Tinder. Her name was Robin. She had blue hair, freckles, and beautiful amethyst purple lips. According to her profile, she had the same interest in the stuff I was into, and was even around the same age as me. Even better, she lived in the same town as me. By the way, I live in Memphis, Tennessee. We started having a friendly group chat on Tinder, which was going well. Her message said, "You may not know me, but we went to the same high school." I replied, "Are you sure?" She said, "Yeah. I was always the quiet one at the back of class." "Anyways, I think you're really cute. We should hang out sometime." I agreed and asked her to where she wanted to hang out, where to meet her, and what time I should be there. She said we'd hang out at her place and meet her at the park tomorrow night at around 9 p.m. I accepted. I got to the park that night at around 9 p.m. sharp. I didn't call her because I didn't want to sound too desperate. Some time passed, and I finally decided to call her to no response. I also tried texting her to no avail as well. It was around 9:30 p.m. There was still no sign of her, and I was beginning to grow impatient. I was starting to think that maybe she wasn't going to show up at all. I sighed and said, "I knew this was too good to be true. She's not even here yet. Screw it. I'm going home. I can't believe I came out here this late for nothing." Oh well, so much for online dating. I was about to start my walk home when suddenly I saw a black convertible pull up to my location. The car stopped right in front of me, and the window rolled down, revealing a creepy-looking old man who was probably in his mid-30s. He gazed at me with a weird smile and asked, "You going somewhere, kid?" I responded, "Yeah, I'm just headed home." He asked me why I was out there this late, and told him that I was supposed to meet someone, but it seemed like she wasn't going to show up. He said, "Oh, you must be waiting for my daughter." The man, by the name of Jeff, introduced himself to me as Robin's father, and said that Robin has told him a lot about me. He told me that Robin couldn't meet me at the park because she remembered that was the night she had to go to a slumber party with her friends, and she forgot to cancel. He told me she wouldn't be home till 11 o'clock, and that's when I knew my night was a bust. He apologized and offered to give me a ride home. I knew it was going to take too long for me to walk, so I accepted. It was going to be a long drive, but luckily I knew all the shortcuts to my house. I told him where I lived and how to get there as I got into the car. After a few minutes, I was feeling tired from being out so late, so I closed my eyes for just a few short seconds and dozed off. Not long afterward, I awoke. Feeling a little drowsy, I rubbed my eyes and realized that I was still in the car. I asked the man where we were, as this wasn't the usual route to my house. He said, "Relax, kid, this is a shortcut. We're almost there." I asked where we were going, and then he looked at me with some sinister grin on his face and just chuckled. I felt my heart almost explode out of my chest as he did that. I looked down and saw a handgun sticking out of his jacket pocket. I put two and two together and realized what was happening. I told him, "Let me out now!" He responded, "No." Then, he put his foot on the accelerator, speeding up the car. I tried to get out, but he had already put the child lock on. It seemed hopeless. I was trapped. There was no way out. To make matters worse, we were driving through a forest area with no cell service. I couldn't even call for help. But I just had to get out. As soon as the car started to slow down, I stabbed him in his shoulder with a pocket knife that I found on the floor. He screamed in pain as I was able to turn off the child lock, unlock the door, and run as fast as I could into the woods. While I was running, I could hear multiple gunshots being fired at me, but luckily not a single one hit me. I never looked back because I had the fear of the man chasing me at the back of my mind. I dove behind a tree and hid under a bush. I heard the man yelling, "You can't hide from me! I will find you!" I covered my mouth with my hands and held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Everything was silent for a while, until I saw the man was looking for me with a flashlight. He flashed it past me multiple times. When I heard his footsteps going deeper into the woods, that's when I knew the coast was clear. I ran, using the flashlight on my phone to help navigate me through the dark and scary woods. In hindsight, I knew that was a stupid move considering the situation. I could hear the leaves crunching and the twigs snapping as I ran, which would also easily give away my position. When the crunching and snapping got louder, I looked behind me and my heart dropped when I saw that the man was chasing me. I ran as fast as I could with the man hot on my tail, firing every single last live round he had in his gun, but thankfully the shots missed again. "There's nowhere for you to hide," he said. I thought I was going to die, until I heard the man trip over something, and I was able to get away unharmed. I kept running until I was out of the woods and back onto the road. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be seen, which means I lost him. I sighed in relief, and then I saw a red car driving down the road. I was able to wave it down and told the driver that I was kidnapped and almost killed by some crazy man in the woods. It took a lot of begging, but the driver finally gave me a ride to the police station, and I told the cops everything. Unfortunately, I didn't get the man's tag number, but I gave the police a clear description. After the police had run a search, they told me that he didn't even have a daughter, and that they've been trying to catch this guy for months. As it turns out, he's wanted in several countries for the kidnappings of multiple teenagers and young men. How I managed to escape him is a miracle. The officers kindly gave me a ride home, and I didn't tell anyone what happened except my brother. The man was never found, nor was he ever caught, and they say he's still out there, even to this day, which scares me the most. What's even worse is that I stupidly gave him my address, so who knows if he might try to kidnap me again. Needless to say, my days of using Tinder weren't over after that. The whole incident just made me a lot more cautious from there on out.
Thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. If you would like to support the channel, check out the merch link in the video description.